Well, welcome. Welcome to the presentation on 21st Century Leader, Profiting in the Exponential Age. This is not the first time that the game for business, the success rules, the things that we need to do to make us successful have changed. And that fundamentally altered what it meant to be in business. I think we're absolutely blessed to be living in this age. The opportunities that are in front of us today far surpass anything that has ever happened in the history of mankind. And this first section is about listening, and that's Jeff Bezos. He was working for a New York investment firm, and he looked around and he saw that the internet was growing at 3,200% a year. He said, you have to keep in mind that human beings are not good at understanding exponential growth. It's just not something that we're used to, that we grew up with. And he said that was a wake-up call. Well, McKinsey wrote an article in May 2003 about disruptive technologies. And they list 12 technologies, not one, 12 technologies that are coming on stream. And here's what they say about the combined effect of those 12 technologies. Taking them all together and netting out the overlaps, they have the potential to drive economic impact on the order of $14 to $33 trillion per year by 2025, 20 and 40% of global GDP. Where do these disruptive opportunities come from? These technologies and the others that they're monitoring grow exponentially, and there's a curve that shows you an exponential growth rather than a linear growth. So let's start with the land speed record. We're all familiar with a car. I went and researched the land speed record all the way back to its origins, which was in 1898 by a Frenchman who drove a 3,200-pound electric car that cost $2,500 and went at the amazing speed of 58 miles per hour. And then by 1997, Andy Green drove this thing, which had two Rolls-Royce jet engines on it, for 20,000 pounds, costing millions of dollars, to the current land speed record of 763 miles per hour, which was an average increase of 1.25% per year. Look at all the other technologies that everybody in this room grew up with and have our life experiences shaped by, and that's what that is. A compact 386 1987 disk drive that is 20 cubic inches, cost $2,000 at the time, and has 20 megabytes of storage. In 2013, I bought this, which of course you can't see, right, is this little scan disk. Right? And that's point something 7 cubic inches, 70 bucks and 64 gigabytes. It's Kodak. And they actually had box cameras, and that was the major camera for everybody until 1949 when they introduced the first SLR camera. And that's a picture of it then, with the first digital sensor. And this, by the way, is what it looked like. Right? So they had a Nikon camera that had a little sensor in here, and this is the thing that decoded it. Right? And it had an amazing 0.01 megapixels. Horrible. Which means performance goes up, size goes down by half, and cost goes down by half. So 8 doubles later, in 1991, they actually came out with the first digital camera. And there it is. The sale of film peaked 8 years later. 11 years after that, they were bankrupt. They didn't understand the speed at which this happens. They couldn't react to it, and ironically, they had invented it. And the reason they have any value today is because of the patents. And any money that they've given their shareholders back was because of the value of the patents that they had created around the digital sensor, which now you buy for pennies in your smartphone. Existing experiences that your clients and customers have, and they don't make them 10 to 15% better. They make them radically better on a series of dimensions. Is they help you create new experiences that you didn't dream of. Who would ever have dreamed of, in 1991, having something in your hand that could have done that little video and done it for nothing? And they take over existing business models. They don't just go in and take a share of the business. They wipe it. Which is what happened. In the film business, it's gone. Well, it's not entirely gone, in the same way that blacksmiths are still around. And here's what's happening to business cycles as a result of that. And we've seen it in some industries like media and in music. And in 1960, it was about 60 years. Now the average life cycle of a company listed on Standard & Poor's is only 12. Drone technology has gone for core technologies that they use in that, which is sensors, accelerometers, and a couple of others. Used to cost $100,000 in the 1980s, now costs less than $5, which is why we have all of this stuff on our smartphone. What we have in our hands in our smartphones is in fact a supercomputer back in 1995. All right, business trends. $7 trillion of assets will be controlled by millennials in the next 5 years. Amazon, Target, Subway, and Victoria's Secret are 4 of the hundreds of brands that are currently accepting Bitcoin. Big data, which is analyzing big data streams, the revenue potential of that just in the next 3 years is $33 billion. There are currently 200 cities served by Uber, and I know there's a big kerfuffle about that here in Toronto and in Ottawa. There's a 45% compounding annual revenue growth for 3D printing over the next 5 years. Imagine everything that you have in the field, everything that's touched by you has data attached to it. It collects feeds. And the beauty about this application is that Zeit lets you search by topic, not by magazine, not by site, not by blog, but by topic. So I went along and I saw this. I said, oh wow, credit card sized device can analyze biopsy, help diagnose pancreatic cancer in minutes. Well, given there's no diagnosis today other than the fact that when you've got it full blown and then your life expectancy is about 1.5 years, that's a really, really exciting thing. So I open up the article and there it is there. And I do 2 things. I tell it I like it so that it knows what I like and knows what I dislike and filters the feeds better. And I also say, and so what I do is I tell it to send it to Evernote, another app. I put in a tag, I tell it in medical signals, that's just me, boom. But I don't want you to improve what it is we're doing. I want you to completely reimagine it. Take the listening and say, how do I reimagine the business as opposed to just improving it and getting past the 10 to 15%. Oh, we have an interruption. Sorry. Back to January 2007, when the iPhone was first announced by Steve Jobs.
Our program to bring you this important message.
Steve, let me ask you about the iPhone and the Zune, if I may. The Zune was getting some traction, and Steve Jobs goes to Macworld and he pulls out this iPhone. What was your first reaction when you saw that?
$500 fully subsidized with a plan? I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard, which makes it not a very good email machine.
Now, back to our show.
I don't know how many people have seen that, but that's really telling. So folks that are older than about 35, we're all expert in some kind of domain, whether it is in consulting or whether it's as a CEO or whether it's in marketing or finance or accounting. It doesn't really matter what it is. We all have our expertise in our domain. And when we get a signal in, what happens to the signal is that we go to our neocortex and we try to fit a pattern to it. And we do that instinctively, and we do it really quickly. So when you, and this happens to us all the time, and when you're working in this and somebody comes up to you with a problem, right, you're instinctive about it. And with half the time, within 2 or 3 minutes, you know exactly what the problem is and what the solution is. And 99% of the time, you're right? And it's fast. And this is wonderful. This is great. As we become experts, and it takes about 10,000 hours for this to happen, this is a phenomena that makes it so wonderful, is when you start to see something that's outside that domain that actually looks like it's going to disrupt it, you can't find the pattern in the neocortex, so it sends it back to your amygdala, which is a fight or flight response. By the way, that's all negative, right? And when that happens, you get a shot of adrenaline, you get these other hormones, your heart rate goes up, your temperature goes up, and you not only have an intellectual reaction for why this stupid thing will never work here, but you also have an emotional, physical reaction to it. And depending on how far outside your norm it is, that reaction can get quite vociferous. So, just wanted to make you aware of that, and I'm sure there's people in the room who've dealt with people and you said that's what was going on, because that's what happened to Steve Ballmer. There's a lab in England that's currently 3D printing liver cells of which 95% live, which means we'll soon be able to take your DNA and your liver cell and use that to print a replacement liver. That's coming pretty soon. They're already doing that with jaw bones and other bone structures. Within the foreseeable future, if you have a bone break or a massive injury to your knee, you won't in fact have it repaired, you'll just have a new one printed, and then they'll implant it. Which means that new businesses are going to grow up, if you're an athlete, to go in and actually have all these scans done and have replacement parts already built and ready for you, so you don't actually have to grow it, you can have it ready for you. They'll store it and all the rest of it. You can start to imagine, this is the whole reimagine. When you start to understand what this can do, then you start to think about business from an entirely different perspective. There's three roles that create something brand new. First is the dreamer, who comes up with a crazy, whacked, stupid, it will never work idea, like Jules Verne did in 1885 when he said, let's go to the moon, and popularized it. That creates the impetus for inventors. That's the second role, to get involved, that says, that's a really cool idea. I wonder what it is we're going to need to be able to do to make that happen. And they squirrel away until they get it to a point where it can be commercialized, at which point you need an organizer, an entrepreneur to say, great, I can take this thing and take it to a market. So that's the kind of steps that, broadly speaking, that it goes through. You need to have dreamers and inventors and entrepreneurs kind of engaged in that in order to take something new and bring it to market. Larry Page, we are one click away from irrelevance. There's a guy that gets it, because he's right. All it needs is for somebody to come up with this fabulous algorithm that ups the level of performance, and all of a sudden we stop clicking on Google and we start clicking on something else once it becomes well known that in fact this is the unbelievable search engine in the world. One of the strategies is actually go and buy it. You buy the firm, and that doesn't address your issue. I'll get to that later, of how do you make the right bets to do it, to supplement existing business models. So this is not to disrupt your business model, but to supplement it. So what they're doing here is they're actually programming DNA in their computer. That creates a protein which they inject into a plant, and that becomes part of the DNA of the plant. Then they use the plant to create a 5-gallon or 20-gallon liquid base, which has got this DNA in it. They can make an infinite number of variations and an infinite quantity of that DNA. They need a drop of it, a drop to go on the thing. And then, if you put a scanner over it, it will tell you whether in fact it matches the DNA, in which case you know that that's not a counterfeit part. The US Defense Department buys 33 billion, that's billion, chips a year. That's just the US Defense Department. And they're now saying, to make sure that their parts that they're acquiring are not counterfeit, they need one of these drops on it. So here's some rules for investing. I work with a company in Pittsburgh, and we created some rules for investing for companies just like this. It was a third-generation family business, and they were looking for exponential growth opportunities for their fourth generation. They had some very standardized Coca-Cola distribution media companies in their portfolio, but they wanted to get something exciting. So here's the rules that were created. Offering is radically different. The market is exponential, i.e. that DNA one is absolutely exponential. When you get 2% or 3% of the worldwide market, right, you get a huge multiple on share price. There's significant IP protection, which they had, very high margins, demographics and regulations are working for them. They understand it. It's important. The owners, and especially the next generation, find it interesting, because if you're 20-odd and you're going to become ultimately the CEO of this company, maybe Coca-Cola distribution is not turning your crank every night when you go home. They have a committed board. They buy close to the proof of market concept, people that can sell them stuff so they can get control of it. We contribute more than just money, and there's a plan to get a control of it. So these are some of the new rules for investing in these kinds of companies. You notice that they're different sets of rules than what you might have if you were making a standardized investment to do mergers and acquisitions when you go through and look at that. Mentality there, but you need a different mentality to run what I'm labeling the greenhouse, which is your lab. And so here's some companies who've all got labs, and they've all turned them on in order to reimagine their business. So what they did was they created this little lab. They have a whole bunch of IT people that do boring stuff like create web pages for clients. but they also have this interesting stuff. So when a client wants to do something interesting, like as they did with DeVry Institute, and they created a whole new way to attract people to come to their university by actually creating a game that potential students could play with, it was their lab that did that. And because of that, and because you have to earn your way into the lab, and until you've actually earned your way into the lab, you can never get a senior position in the company. When they asked for more people, because they were growing so fast, they had lineups out the door, people who want to come work for them. What are some of the new financial metrics? Well, operating costs start to approach zero. So customer acquisition and servicing, Airbnb is, as of the last reporting, has 600,000 rooms that they can book. And they need 10 people to run that business. 10. Compare that to Marriott. They almost have as many rooms. I think they got more rooms than Marriott does, and they do it with 10 people. Now that's scalability. That's an operating cost that's approaching zero, right? And same thing with product upwards. We all know about software updates are virtually free. We get all our, our iPads and all that stuff is updated. But Tesla is doing that with their engines, right? Market sizes approaches everything and everybody. So 21st century leader perspectives. We grew up believing that technology makes products better for the same price. Hopefully you're starting to understand that it creates new value in new markets. That business is fundamentally incremental. No, the examples I've given you are businesses that are growing exponentially because they're using the performance improvements in the technology to make that happen. Businesses are safe, innovate within the business model. No, businesses are at risk. At some point, you will need to innovate on your business model. Leaders are performance focused. Leaders are performance and disruptive focused. Better through performance improvements, radically better through performance reimagining. Highly planned change, learn as you go. Local, think global, don't think local. Best in local, world class in local. They're searching through 3 million pages a second to find the paragraph level on the latest document that was created around oncology to do that, which means that if you're up in somewhere way up north and you have access to this, you have the world's best diagnostic system locally. It's a big disruption. It's just starting in the medical field, but it's going to happen fast. It's about embracing uncertainty and ambiguity. There's a lot of ambiguity in this in terms of how do you figure out who the winners are going to be. It's not certain on ROI. It's about making many small bets as opposed to trying to invest in the one. A failure is a failure. No, as a failure is just a chance to learn, and it's moving from being bureaucratic to entrepreneurial. Because your IT manager or whatever, those folks have got this kind of a focus, and this needs to be a broader, more strategic focus. And you need to learn to explore ways to adapt that to your existing strategic goals and not just try and take what they are, but try and look at them. And don't wait until something's fully commercialized. Engage with it now. It doesn't mean you have to buy into it, but you need to learn about it to understand the disruption that you can make rather than someone's going to make to you. There's going to be a need for certain kinds of talent, depending on what industry you're in, to drive this forward. And for those of you who are politically motivated and are engaged with policymakers, you need to make sure that they understand what those needs are going to be so that we can make sure that our education system is responsive to that, because currently they're not. You need to reward listening and learning and provide the tools to capture the trends, not unlike the one I showed you, which is a free tool that you can get if you got an iPad. You need to conduct deep dives on how customers are really using your offering. Well, I've worked enough with organizations to know they really don't know what it's like to sit on, be a customer and walk through a customer's shoes point by point by point through all the interfaces to see what all the pain points are. And you need to devote 20%, up to 20%, but not more than 20%, and I'd say start with 10, right, to reimagining your strategies. And get started with it and say, how can we take this to a completely different level? What are the technologies out there that will help us do that? And start. And start small. But you have to make the commitment to the people that you're prepared to put the resources to say, I'm going to allow you the time to do this little team that I put together. This is not on top of what you're doing. We're going to rejuggle the work so you have the time to do that. Why this really matters? Why does it really matter? Well, honestly, it's not about us. It's about our sons and our daughters and our grandsons and our granddaughters. The world that we are currently living in and are going into is radically different than the world that we grew up with. And quite frankly, our education system was built in the 1850s and are struggling to actually deal with the 1980s, let alone what the year 2020 is going to look like. And so it is incumbent upon us to understand that and guide the experiences that they go through to make sure that they're prepared. And what that means is that the people who will win, it's all about being creative rather than process-driven. It's about invention rather than improvement. And it's about entrepreneurialism versus bureaucracy. And so I believe that everybody in this room has an obligation to make sure that their kids, and in my case, the grandkids, have got the right life experiences, that they get a full and rich experience in these parts. Because they're not going to get it in school, not to the level that they need it in order for them to thrive. So thank you very much.